Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Shooting in China, a co-presentation between HollyShorts and the China Hollywood Society. My name's Jess Canoplia, and I'm Director of Operations for the China Hollywood Society in LA. Before I hand over to my colleague Dedi, who's going to moderate the panel, I just want to say thank you very much to our panellists, Cliff, to Sam, to Adam, and also to Melanie. We're really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. I do have to give a bit of a special shout out to Sam, who 24 hours ago did not know he was going to be on this panel. One of our other panelists, Nick, had to be called away to New York quite unexpectedly, so thank you very much for stepping in. For those of you in the room who aren't members of the Society, just a very quick plug. We would love you to join us. It is free to join. We have a branch here in LA. We also have a branch in Beijing. And we aim to offer events every month, be they panels, seminars, or screenings. So we would love to see your faces more and more at our events. Dedi, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Shooting in China panel. My name is Dedi Zur, and I'm going to be moderating this panel. Just a quick brief about what I do. I've been a composer in the industry for many, many years now, working mostly in the States and Europe. And in the last couple of years, I got involved with a lot of Chinese filmmakers, directors, and producers, and I've scored quite a few movies out there, from independent films to feature documentaries, etc., working with independent producers and directors, and with CCTV, the government channel. This is, in a nutshell, my story, and let's have a chat with the panelists here. So I would maybe start just quickly with a brief intro. We can start with Sam. Just in a paragraph or two. Sure. Who are you?
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Sam Vutas. I'm an Australian filmmaker. I've lived in China for 15 years. First lived there in the 80s for a bit, in the 90s and the 2000s. I've worked in Chinese television and film for about 8 years as a director, a writer, a cameraman, an actor. I've worked on tiny Chinese independent movies to big, huge budget films, including City of Life and Death by Lu Chuan, and the upcoming Empires of the Deep, which is a 3D fantasy movie that was shot outside of Beijing. And now I'm working in LA as well as in Beijing.
My name is Cliff Lowe. I'm an entertainment attorney representing producers, screenwriters, directors, actors, music people. China is part of what I do, and a growing part, and I also have helped people in Greater China as well as other Asian territories and outside of the U.S., although the majority of my practice is based in the U.S. So I'm negotiating deals, helping structure deals, drafting agreements, setting up companies, and financing agreements and co-production agreements, and all the way from the development stage to the financing stage, and hopefully a distribution stage.
Hi, I'm Adam Christian Clark, and I'm a feature film writer and director. More specifically now, I'm doing kind of art house features. But what I did in China, which I haven't, last time I went there was 2009. In 2006, I went and I directed what was their first reality show. They had done competition shows like sort of American Idol, so they'd done that prior. But this was sort of their first attempt to do something with people living in a house, or a real reality show. And then I went back in 2009 and I directed a short film there. And I also directed for China in 2008. I directed here in America. I directed for Dragon TV, which is a satellite channel there. I directed their Chinese New Year special. So they did a concert here in America that was a fusion of both Chinese and American artists. So it was Kanye West would perform, but then also with Jackie Chan. And so those are my 3 Chinese experiences. But I lived there for a little over a year the first time, so it was a lot of fun. All right.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out. My name's Melanie Ansley. I'm a producer, and I'm half Chinese, half Canadian. I grew up most of my life in China. And as I got into this business, I started out with documentaries. Sam and I have produced or made several documentaries that have screened on TV stations internationally, and then went on to do feature films as well. So our most recent one we did was a film called Red Light Revolution, which is a sex shop comedy about a guy who opens up an adult store in Beijing. It's kind of like Clerks, but with sex toys. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. I've done associate producing and fixing for networks that go to China. So during the Olympics, I worked with NBC. I've worked with Bryant Gumbel at HBO, and whoever comes into China basically to do segments or to do shows there. I've worked with several of them. So yeah, that's it, I think.
Excellent. Well, let me start with a couple of broad questions about working out there in China and the difference. I think the main, it's a very broad question, but what would we say is the main difference? The main differences between working out here, as you both worked in the two sides of the pond, between working here and China in terms of anywhere from pre-production, production, post-production, and distribution. What if you can just chime in and give me an idea about the main differences that you experienced overall?
Sure, since I'm the producer, why don't we start with budget? Budgets are very different. I think there's, there is this idea that there's a pot of gold over in China, and I mean that there is, I think, a lot of possibilities for sure. But I think a lot of people are also shocked at, the level of money that gets put into a project. So I think from the very start, budgets are extremely different. That said, you do get a lot of, if you know how to work it, you get a lot of bang for your buck over in China. There's just things that you can pay for that you would never dream of being able to afford here. So I mean that's one really major difference. Just to kick it off.
Excellent. Adam, you have some thoughts?
Okay,
sure?
I'll talk about it then from a director's standpoint. So from a director's standpoint, the biggest difference is, I mean, if you're used to working in Hollywood, it's really the best place in the world. There's just no comparison to it. Everybody that works in Hollywood is a very specialized position that has a career that they've been working their whole life towards. It's just perfect here. So in working in China, it's very difficult in comparison to working here. The level of proficiency is just not even comparable on any level. But the passion is still the same. And one thing that's cool is there's a lot more people there, so you'll have a lot larger crew. But like an enormous difference is just sort of like understanding what you're responsible for as a director there. Like in working in Hollywood, one of the great things about filmmaking is such a collaborative process. So like when you hire a DP and you hire a gaffer, and you hire a production designer, and you have these department heads, you really depend on them as independent free thinkers that bring their own creative, imaginative take on the project. That mindset doesn't exist in China. It doesn't. And like I don't want to like beat around the bush. It's just not a part of that film industry. Those people, like the gaffer in China considers himself an electrician and somebody who's in charge of the technicality of the light, but he's not going to bring creative vision in the lighting. So in working with that crew, you just have to know that in advance. And if you adapt to that and give more clear direction, you can get what you want, but it's not comparable on the creative standpoint. And then like there's also a huge difference in censorship. Just, like American filmmaking is a free open art form. And like, I can talk about some, like maybe it's a follow-up question, but in working with the censors there, it's very difficult. It's very much like, it's a arm of the propaganda. It's a propaganda arm of the government. It's not entertainment. So in creating films and television, there you're very much answering to an agenda that has a political slant to it, and you have to be comfortable with that.
From the legal perspective, as I'm sure you may know, it's still a developing process in terms of understanding of the need to sort out legal issues and to do contracts. There's been a gradual development over the years, but it's still an ongoing process.
I guess I'll just talk about the difference between being on set. The speed in which things can get done on a Chinese film set is remarkably fast. Has a lot to do with just the number of people that can build and construct. They can build an enormous Greek temple in a matter of weeks. It really is quite extraordinary. Also, in terms of work hours, it's it's very common on a Chinese film set to go up to 18, 20 hours on a day and then have a very short turnaround time. Also, you'll work 7 days a week. Often, even big national holidays are still work days. So it's just the number of hours worked is really quite phenomenal in compared to, say, here where there's union regulations that don't permit.
Interesting. Well, the other question, Adam kind of already got into it a little bit, is about censorship. And let me bring it to your attention. A lot of people are very curious about and fearful about the censorship process in China. And what are your thoughts about it? That's the first part of the question. The second part is, you think it is now changing and evolving? Is it becoming a little less strict? Do you see a certain pattern?
I'll answer your second question first. I think it is in many ways becoming less strict, and that's because of the internet and because of big companies like Youku and Tudo that are allowing content to be seen by millions of people without permits. So what we did with Red Light Revolution, the film that Melanie and I worked together on, we didn't actually go through the censorship process, but we were still legally able to be seen by millions of people in China through online video. So that's a very realistic way to reach a large population in China today. As to whether I believe that the recent changes that SAFT has announced are actually really significant changes, I'm a bit skeptical. I think it might be more of the same in terms of the actual policies.
I haven't worked there for, I can't speak for like the last 24 months or so, but what I witnessed from the time I was first there to the last time I was there, I witnessed it getting more strict. Like, for instance, when we did the reality show, like, I would meet with them on a daily basis. Or not on a daily, on a weekly basis, but a daily basis when I was first there. And through that experience of them getting like exposed to the reality show format, for instance, like at the end of that experience, they issued a decree banning all reality from primetime television, which is still enacted. Lust caution happened like right at that time. There was a huge like backlash that it got stricter. I witnessed it gotten more regulated. I'm sure we all read like the New York Times yesterday, and we saw that there's like a new anti-freedom decree. I would say it's an extremely closed off place, is extremely censored, that I didn't witness like any like closeness to it alleviating on any level. Though people are getting their programming through pirated DVDs and through the internet, which is, if they are using a proxy they're seeing, uncensored internet. But I mean, it's a place where you can't even use Google. You can't even get the New York Times. The Economist is only sold in one hotel in the whole city of Shanghai, and it's censored. So I mean, it's not America, and that's just it.
I love how the legal side just skipped right over. Just decided to pass on the microphone and not talk about this. To your point, yeah, I think you're right. There's, it is so tight and it is so closed in so many ways. But then, and actually, I mean, if you look at the rules that they've actually given out, I mean, SARFT, what are they called now? They're actually not SARFT. I keep forgetting the new acronym for them, but. The rules are that you cannot, what is it, how's the wording? You cannot have a movie that distorts reality. So take that however you will. No time travel, no horror, no monsters, and basically lessening the shock value. But so you're not allowed to have horror films, and yet Painted Skin was one of the biggest box office successes in China. So how does that get around the strict rules that are there that censor horror, right? And the answer to that, I think that as with a lot of things in China, anything is possible, everything is impossible. And it just depends on, what door you find and what key you have and where you knock and who you know, which actually in some ways is kind of, some would argue that's very similar to Hollywood or to the States.
Very interesting. Let me direct some more specific questions to you. We can start with Cliff, unless you want to chime in on this subject. If there's anything of Okay. So, Adam, let me ask you, you already touched on it a little bit, but maybe go a little more in detail. You have quite a broad career. You work with Tarantino, and then you went into directing reality TV. But then in 2006, you found yourself spending a year directing a reality TV series for China, for a Chinese audience. A little bit about, the experience and again, the major difference of, what you had to go through there in order to put that thing together.
Well, I mean, it was incredible. It was like the most incredible year of my life, bro. It was wonderful. I mean, China wasn't even on my radar. I mean, I was aware of the country, but like I love to travel. It wasn't even like on my list of like places to go, and I wasn't tracking it on any level. And then I got a call, to direct this reality show, and it seemed pretty wild. So I think a week later, I was in Shanghai with like not knowing a word of Mandarin. And it was wild. I mean, like 2006 Shanghai, it was like really at the end of a cusp of, it was like living in 1920s F. Scott Fitzgerald, New York or something. It was like, I moved into an apartment and there was a park next to me, and then 3 months later, there was a whole like 30-floor building with a Starbucks in the ground floor. And working there as when I was there, I was the only American director I knew of. I felt it was like I was treated like I was Jay-Z or something. It was just like, it was an incredible, wonderfully exciting time that had this incredible energy. And China does still, I don't mean to be negative about China because I love China. And in comparing it to Hollywood, it's oftentimes like easy to focus on how this place is so great and like how China is developing. But something China has that we don't have here is the energy level there is incredible. The hunger that people have and the level of innovation and just the circling sort of energy that everyone being an entrepreneur really is there manifests. It's a real exciting place to be, and you can like get everything done there. It just, it sometimes takes a little longer if you don't have you have to just change your expectations and sort of your goals if you're coming from the model of working here, because it's not here.
That kind of answers the question.
Right.
I was be a little more specific. We were talking the other day about the crews, and you're mentioning that the crews are three times bigger than what you'll have as a normal crew here.
Yeah, the crews are a lot bigger. So like for instance, like here you may have like a camera assistant. Well, in China it's different. It's like you have a camera, you may have like 4 camera assistants for the same person. So like if you have an average crew for a reality show here of that size, it was a big show. It was basically like China's Next Top Model, like America's Next Top Model. So there was a live elimination process with like 8 cameras, and then it was a large crew. So here you'd probably have like a crew of like 60 doing that in total. There it was like closer to 100. And the difference is just like, in China you have a camera assistant who's in charge of just watching the camera. That's his only job. He's not even hired by you. He comes with the rental house. So he's like almost like insurance, just to make sure nothing's stolen. That guy's not going to help you out with anything. Then you have another guy who's like, the like assistant to the camera person that's just there to like his personal assistant, who's also not going to really be a camera assistant. Then you have a third person who's like maybe what you would expect as a camera assistant here, somebody who would pull focus or, change the battery, change the tape. So there you have like 3 people maybe doing a job that you're used to one person doing here. There's a lot of that. One of the biggest differences is that in renting gear there, it comes like as sort of a full package. Like if you rent a light, it'll come with somebody who's like will operate the light, but that person doesn't necessarily have the experience of like working at the level that you'd want. So that person probably don't want as like your gaffer. That person just would take the light literally from the truck and put it on the set and just stand there for 12 hours. So you have a lot of that. There's a lot of like, in comparison, if you look at it, you would call it inefficiency if you're used to working here. But if you like step back and just accept that it's different, it's not so frustrating, I guess. But like a huge difference in working from here in China is that harmony is so important there. Like being harmonious. Like if you're used to working here and just getting everything your way and everybody's efficient, you're just like sort of blah 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 that. You like bring that like sort of pointy attitude over there. Like it does not. Like the first couple months I was there, just everybody hated me. I had like key people quitting. Like people were crying every day, and like it was just like this constant. Like I would just be like, what did I do? I would just ask them to like do something I thought was very innocent, and I really had to back up and like realize that the concept of harmony and everybody working in a team and being very respectful of people on what I would consider a personal level is like it's indicative there to professional level. It's all the same, and you really have to make sure that your sort of aura and your way of communicating with people is in a very respectful and genteel way in comparison to what you may be used to here, or you're not going to be a very good leader because nobody really will respond to you. So that was a big learning curve for me. But
excellent. Well, I think it would be a good segue to talking about being on set and shooting. And the question is for you, Sam. A little bit about your acting experience, since you've done, quite a wide range of projects, from indie films to much bigger scope productions. How would you, what can we tell us about the experience of being on set in China, working those long hours, etc., and maybe the difference between your experience working with Chinese directors versus the Western directors that came to do co-productions there?
The biggest difference would probably be working in Chinese television versus working in Chinese movies. They're probably similar to the States. They're incredibly different, not just in terms of speed, but in terms of the director. So on Chinese television, you'll have the director of the program, but you also have like an actor's director who specifically directs the actors into to perform. Another big difference is just the amount of content that the Chinese TV stations will shoot. When we were shooting TV series, we'd shoot like an episode a day. There'd be maybe 50 episodes in a single season. So it's an enormous amount of just content that's being created at a very short amount of time. In terms of working on the bigger productions, it's almost exactly the opposite. So working on City of Life and Death, that was a production that was in. We were shooting for over a year. I was only on board for maybe 3 months that year, but it was just completely different. So I don't know if the people in the audience have seen this movie, but it's a movie about World War II and the Nanjing massacre, and he built this city of Nanjing outside in Manchuria, and it was like a playpen for the director. He could go out on set and have complete control to do whatever he wanted to do any day. He didn't have much, from what I could see, very little pressure from the producers. It was almost like an improvisational experience. So it was on one hand going from TV, which the director's not even there, and it's to something like City of Life and Death. It was very different.
Interesting. Another question for you. Talk about another facet of what you're doing is directing. Your experience as a director, you directed documentaries. From what I remember in our conversation, the documentaries were both for Chinese audience, but also went overseas to other markets. How was your experience working with the producers, directing for this TV series, knowing that this is not only for a Chinese market, but also going internationally?
Melanie and I collaborated on a documentary for a Hong Kong company, and it was actually one of the interesting. We often talk about the cultural differences between the West and the East, and one thing that I hadn't quite realized until we worked on that documentary is there's also a cultural difference between mainland China and Hong Kong China. And as the producer of that was from Hong Kong, and it was quite fascinating just to see the problems that could eventuate through the mainland crew and the Hong Kong crew, just from seeing things from completely different perspectives. And so in Chinese there's a phrase about looking down on someone. So the Hong Kong people would feel that they were being looked down on, and the mainland Chinese would feel like they were being looked down on. So I think it's also interesting to, if you're thinking to collaborate or work on a film in China, is think about where are your producers from, what provinces. There's a lot of subtleties to filming there. In terms of shooting documentaries for the international market versus the Chinese market, the style is very, very different. We had a documentary that was reversioned for Shanghai television and also sold internationally, and we needed 2 separate cuts for that to make it fit more into the Chinese model of shows, because Chinese documentaries, for Melanie can talk more about this, but just the style's quite different.
Very well. Clifford Law. Let's talk about the law. You have quite a wide range of clients that you're working with, both domestically and the co-productions. And I wanted to just hear a little bit about your experience, the work that you perform in that relates to the co-productions between China and the U.S.
My clients tend to be, they could be based here, some are based over there. Most of the work that I do is sort of the early stage work in terms of people trying to collaborate to work on scripts, producers trying to option material. Moving forward from that, some of the work I do is involving producers trying to lock in the investment, to then produce the film. For example, one of my clients has managed to get at least preliminary approval on his script, and he's got partial financing. So I've been helping him with investor agreements to raise the money to shoot.
Another question I have for you is, what people that want to approach, doing creative work and production in China, what would you say, what would be your advice of what the certain individuals have to be aware of when they're embarking on, going out to China and trying to, be involved in creating a production or being part of a crew, if they're being hired to be to do a certain aspect of the art in a Chinese production?
Well, first off, there are cultural differences, which I think are important to understand, that affects, the way people do business. You need to be, your understanding of the deal that you think you're entering into, might not be the same as the person or company in China or in Asia that you're dealing with. So you need to, take time to get to know the culture and to understand better, what it is exactly that you're getting into. And then, as I was mentioning before, especially, since the knowledge of the legal aspect and the business aspects and attention to them is still developing art in China. You need to, I think more so than in doing business in the U.S. or other Western countries, you do need to make sure that, those things are clarified, because the likelihood that you're not on the same page with, the people that you're dealing with, there's greater likelihood for a dispute, just because of the differing understanding of the importance of sorting out legal and business issues early in the process.
Very well. And in terms of the way the contracts are formed and any formatting of how, is it very, very different between what you see here as local domestic contracts in the United States versus the contracts that are being done in China?
Well, they're shorter.
Okay.
Nowadays, they're usually in 2 languages, from what I've seen. They're gradually becoming a bit more detailed, a bit more complex. They're gradually, able to deal with, wider range of issues and in greater detail in a more sophisticated way. But it's still a process. So, and it's the sort of thing where, if you're coming from a Western perspective, you should definitely, you may need to be proactive in terms of asking for certain things to be clarified in these agreements, because it's not necessarily going to happen from the Chinese side.
Melanie, hi there. Hi. Couple questions for you. As a bilingual producer, and both in China and here, doing a lot of work in the West in different parts, you obviously have quite an advantage over a lot of American producers that will come to do work in China. You have chosen quite a risque topic with doing a red light revolution. Can you tell us just a little bit about the hurdles you needed to get through, and the experience of making this film happen?
Sure. Yeah, it's as an indie film. I mean, indie filmmaking is hard anywhere, and I think that a lot of people have asked about the hurdles of production for us in doing Red Light Revolution, because obviously it's about sex toys. It's something that won't get past the censors. We had blow up dolls and all this kind of stuff all over the set. And I think a lot of people felt that we must have had a lot of hurdles in the production aspect, in terms of censorship or people coming and shutting us down, and, were the police there. And I don't think we saw one police person ever. I don't think anybody ever came to shut us down. And I think that's an interesting thing about filming in China too, that in a sense actually indie filmmaking is in some ways very feasible there. I mean, you wouldn't be able to go out into LA and just shoot on the street or go into some shop. I mean, you need LA film permits. You need all of these kind of permits to go through before you can, even put a camera out there. So our difficulties actually didn't come from the production itself. That was actually extremely smooth as long as we got locations and whatnot. We were all fine. I think the logic in China with that is that they're not policing everybody on the streets, because that would just be way too much manpower in order to go around and shut down shoots. That's just a waste of time. Because they have this rule of censorship in terms of you need to get a permit in order to show on television or show in theaters or sell to DVD to get your money back, they figure that, shoot all you want, but you're not going to be able to sell it. And that's where they control it, because they've already got tight control over the distribution aspect. So in terms of indie filmmaking, that's actually where the real problem is. The problem is not in actually making the thing; it's in selling the thing. Finding your market and how you're actually going to get your money back from this. So for us, I think that was the bigger problem rather than production itself. For production, it really went very smoothly. I would say we had a 29-day shoot roughly, all in Beijing. We had an adult shop come on board actually as one of our supporters, because they actually can't advertise in China. So this was perfect product placement for them, because wherever we went, they would get a plug, and they can't do commercials, they can't do billboards. So this was kind of perfect for them.
Talking about permits, you mentioned that in indie filmmaking, very rarely, if I understand correctly, you actually need permits to go and shoot a certain area on the streets or a shop or any other venue. But you worked on various scopes of films and productions in different positions as well. When you do a bigger budget film, how do you go about on the ground getting permits, etc.? Is it similar to how they do it here, or is there?
No, I wouldn't say it's. I mean, there's some similarities, I guess. It also depends on what type of production you're doing. So it's different for documentaries. Let's say you're doing a TV documentary, then that you would need a certain TV production partner through. Is it CFCC? I'm trying to remember it's CFCC, isn't it, for documentaries? I think there's two people you can go through. There's CFCC and there's another one, CITVC, isn't it? I think. Yeah, the China International TV something or other. So between those two, what you do is you take your proposal and your treatment and you go to them, and they would give you your permit and they would set you up. You have to pay certain fees, and depending on whether it's a co-production, they also had another organization, CICC, I think it is, that does something like, I think they do 10-20% maybe, if that, of investment into the documentary, if they like it, if they decide that it's going to be this kind of co-production between two sides for a documentary. So that's the documentary side of it. You'd have to partner up with one of these organizations. For a feature film, as I understand it, you would obviously need a Chinese partner, and there are licensed production companies. You can't just go to any production company that's set up shop. It has to be one that has a license to apply for a formal permit from the government to be shooting a co-production. And co-production, I think, maybe the other thing we should talk about. I mean, yeah, I don't know whether everybody here is more into shorts or into features or what the focus is on, but just to clarify, co-productions, I think, that word gets slung around quite a bit, and there's actually different types. A lot of people will refer to co-productions as also, foreign countries going into China and hiring local crew to assist them and help them, basically, but they don't have actually any agreement that this is actually going to show in China. It's basically, you're a completely foreign entity, you're going there, you're hiring the crew, you're shooting it there. It may be a Chinese story, it may not, but then you're getting out of there and you're selling it elsewhere. And people refer to that as co-production. That's actually not an official co-production. An official co-production is where you go and you partner up with a company there, and you've got a point system, a very strict legal agreement that this is a national co-production. It's within the quota of China's allowable films, which is now, I think, over 40, something like that. They just increased it. And then you get around the quota system, and that's like the official co-production. So the other thing in going into it is knowing what you want out of it, whether you're doing the official co-production or whether you're actually just going in for assisted production, which is a little more straightforward in most cases.
Would you share one or two of the most craziest experiences you had there as a producer? You've been, let's say, on running the extras of 300 people on the Kite Runner set, and then shot Red Right Revolution. Those are, very extreme examples of filmmaking and different circumstances in which you're part of. Share a point or two.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, the great thing about doing documentaries and working with the networks is that you go and you research crazy things. That's one thing I love about doing documentaries, and you also find the strangest things actually in China. I mean, one of my jobs was to find interesting, quirky stories in China. So I remember having to go and research this restaurant across from me that was, gosh, you're going to see a theme in all my work. Actually, I'm going to get pigeonholed. But across the street from me was this restaurant that's an aphrodisiac restaurant, and it basically, and I was sent to go research this for NBC. I kid you not. This was in one of their Olympic programs, and it was basically a, sorry guys, it was a penis restaurant. It was basically a restaurant that's all it sold, and you had seal and you had snake and you had all that sort of thing, and you'd pay huge amounts for it. And anyway, so yeah, now I know the going price of seal parts in stew. So that was kind of a crazy kind of research trip, but it's just so unexpected. I think the other thing too, and Adam, you might disagree or you might agree, is I think shooting or filming in China is really hugely about being surprised and going with the flow, and also just uncovering some really crazy but very, very interesting things there. I think you learn a lot, especially if you're flexible and you're willing to learn, I think.
Am I answering the same question? I can if you want.
If you want to chime
right.
in and share an experience.
I have different kind of crazy stories, so I'll just share one. So the second time I went there was to do a short film, and part of the reason I wanted to go back and do a short film is that I was exposed to this crazy life there that I really wanted to show, and so I wanted to go there and do a short film that it had very controversial things in it. It dealt with it had prostitution in it, it had drug use in it, and she's right in saying that the police don't really stop you on the street a lot of times there. One exception though is if you want to use the government's resources. So one thing to know about China is that there are a lot of independent rental houses and a lot of independent things, but there aren't independent film labs. And I shot that on film, and the stuff the government owns is much better oftentimes than the independent stuff. So in going back there and wanting a high quality product, in trying to get like 35 millimeter cameras to rent, to try to buy 35 millimeter film, get it developed. That really all has to go through the government labs and the government sources. And in doing that, you have to have approval on your content. So I wrote something that was about prostitution. So what I did, a big part about China that nobody's talked about, but it's a reality there, is like bribery is a very big reality there in working. It's almost like built into your budget. So, I mean, I just bribed, our UPM's father worked at, a government film lab. So we just bribed them for a certain amount of money, and we did that under the auspice of a watch commercial. So I had a permit the whole time saying we were filming a Rolex commercial. You need an approval of your content to bring the film negatives out of the country. It's checked like at customs when you're leaving on the plane. I had that, like I paid them to say they approved it. So that's like a part of China that kind of can't answer like kind of that everything's impossible, anything's possible. Like you kind of can get a lot done for the right price there in comparison to America. And if that's something you're willing to embrace, if you're not willing to embrace it, I would say you'd have a much harder time working there, because it's just kind of like built into your system. Like it's something like you kind of have to expect like your props will go missing, and then you have to kind of like pay to get them back, and that's just kind of like how it works there. I mean, and that's like I had that on all three experiences, so I don't think it was just like one crew. I think it's just the way it works.
Very interesting. That was actually my second question to you about your short. So you answered it in advance.
All right.
And, pretty much answered.
It was really scary. Like I kept thinking we would get like confiscated or shot down. I mean, I did like I had real prostitutes in it. Like I went and found prostitutes on Nanjing Lu and like had them in the film, and like we did real controversial things in that sense, or showed a real area of daily Shanghai life that the censorship or the government cares to pretend doesn't exist.
Let me ask you guys a couple of general questions, because I think we're kind of coming to the end of our time, and I want to open it also for questions for the audience. Everybody has an idea what is the ideal co-production to be shot. Is there any genre or type of film that we say is a strong candidate to be that ideal co-production subject? I guess the filmmakers have to make a choice when they go and embark on a project, or at least come up with a written material that will be a good candidate to be produced. Any thoughts about the matter?
I would just add briefly that like one like innovative thing, or the one recurring thing you see in China is like you can't talk about the government negatively, but it's all right if you place it in like the Edo period and talk about that government negatively. So that's kind of like the way I think recurringly most often art is sort of like freely being expressed in China is through period pieces. That seems to be like really like a big license to have like a different level of violence, a different level of dissent or of rebellion. If it's put, 400 years ago within the context of day-to-day life, it seems to be acceptable. But that's something I haven't explored much, honestly.
Cliff, any thoughts or your experience or your clients about that subject? Okay. Sam, Melanie, would like to chime in a bit about your thoughts about the ideal co-production subject?
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. Period pieces, that's why you see so much of that come out. I mean, partly that's partly practicality, budget. You can get so much there for that, but yeah, also because you have so much more license. And actually, the interesting thing about that is that going the other way doesn't work so well. Going into the future does not work very well, because that's why you don't really see many sci-fi films, because you've got to explain where the government is in all this, and you're predicting what's happened to the government and how they're running things in the future, which is kind of a no-no. So you can go to the past and do those sorts of things. Horror would be a bit of a touchy one. Generally, although, actually Film Biz Asia actually just had a good article recently about how that's starting to change. There's more Chinese horror films coming out now, and they're higher caliber. I think the staple that everybody has gone to that works because it crosses over is martial arts. Hong Kong started that tradition, and that was, great and earned a lot of money, and that crosses languages and borders. But I do think that we're starting to see a little bit of boredom with that as well. Sometimes, so it'll be interesting to see where that goes. I mean, right now, romantic comedy is really huge, and comedies are really huge in China. But the problem with comedy is, and this is the problem everywhere, is that comedies don't really cross very well. So it's finding that balance, and I think a lot of them are really looking at period pieces and interconnected history. So if you can find that, I don't know, that Chinese story in America or that American in China story. Those are the things that I think get the spark going a little bit in terms of people over there being interested in maybe giving that a try.
I don't think anyone's really cracked it yet. It seems to be that if something works really well in China, it's not going to work very well in the West. Tiny Times just was one of the biggest hits of all time in China, and I think its box office receipts here will probably be under $100,000. I wouldn't be surprised. And even Kill Bill that was shot in, I think it was like 2000 back in Beijing, became a huge cult hit overseas, but the box office results in China were very, very low. And often you'll have the producers will try to shoot a movie in English. There's countless movies of sending the American stars over, and somehow, somewhere in the translation, it just doesn't work. It doesn't equate to large box office figures. And if it does, it's only in one particular territory. I think the film that might just change that will be the new Kung Fu Panda film, because they've joined up with Oriental DreamWorks and are going to be using a very large Chinese crew on that. And I think it's a very, just marketing wise, it's going to be very smart, and they're going to have access to a lot more cinemas to be able to play that movie. The deal that they're going to get on the back end for being able to get their money back is going to be much better. So I think you might actually find that as the big studios get more involved in animation over there, there might be a lot of potential to have successful films that are that are made in China that then translate to the West, play in China in Chinese, and then the animation plays in the rest of most Western markets in English or in other European languages.
Very well. Let me ask you. Let's talk about predictions. Where do you see the China? In the next 4 to 5 years, where, in respect to co-production collaboration, in China and the U.S., where do you see it going? What are your predictions?
Continued growth, continued diversity, and the growing diversity in the types of movies that could work.
What kind of things could be detrimental to that process? I mean, do you have any thoughts about that? I mean, in terms of what people bring to the table, especially from the West coming to China to produce? Detrimental
based on what they bring to it?
Well, I think in general, as you build, a co-production, as you have a content and a property that you want to develop into a co-production, what would be, maybe finding a different word for that, where do you see it go in terms of the collaboration between the two sides? And what would be, that you see it growing substantially within the range of the next few years comparing to how it is now?
That's where it seems to be going. It's hard to really say. Obviously, the box office potential. I mean, the trend is there. In terms of co-production specifically, it's a bit harder to say, but I think we're going to see continued growth.
I would just, who knows, it's prediction, but I would just say you're going to see an increase in big tentpole movies, and I think you'll see a further decrease in independent films, just because China, you have to realize that going to the movies is much more of a luxury than here. Like, to go see a movie in the center of Shanghai, like at Xintiandi or something, it still costs $13, just like it does here. So that in China is an enormously larger amount of money. So people are going to movies there for like to see, Iron Man, and that will continue probably to be successful. But the big difference is in terms of independent films, where VOD and iTunes and everything else here has started to generate so much money. That's not the case there. It's free there, so it's either being sold, for pennies on the street in a DVD, or it's just being illegally downloaded. So you're not seeing the revenue or the way to make money, I think, off of independent films. So it'd probably just be more superhero stuff, I guess.
And when you're talking about the difference between independent and bigger, massive picture, you're talking about independent Chinese filmmaking?
No, I would just say because I think everything's being made internationally now. You see something like, just even something like, look at like Cloud Atlas. It was ended up being like a box office failure in America, but it ended up being a profitable film because of both China and of Russia. And I think that every studio here is now thinking about films in that sense. The Chinese box office is just as important as opening numbers here in the States. So I don't think I'm sure there's going to continue to be big budget Chinese movies, but in terms of co-production, I would think that the safe bet would just be these $200 million studio films. It seems to be like that's what the audience wants. I mean,
Okay.
I don't.
Any thoughts, Melanie? Any predictions?
Yeah, I mean, if we had a crystal ball, we could all go home in Cadillacs.
Absolutely.
But I think you're right. Tentpoles are, really when we talk right now about the China market, we're talking about studio films. If you're not in the studio, really, we're not really talking about your films, because there is not really an independent film market there for the Chinese or for us here. But the exciting thing, I think, I'm a big believer in new media, and I do see a lot of under the radar stuff going on with Youku and Le TV and Tudo and QQ and all of these things that are just popping up in China that are now doing online and digital content, and they're needing content because they're on so much and they need so much changeover, and they really are starting to go out and groom younger filmmakers and audiences, and I think that feeds over a little bit. It can feed over a little bit into perhaps foreign filmmakers as well, potentially, in the future, and collaborations there, because they are starting to fund those things. I mean, it's tiny money, but that's where everything starts out. And yeah, you see Le TV and Tudo and Youku. I mean, they're actually funding some of the big films. They are the official distributor. They're putting down money for the big blockbusters as well. So yeah, I think there's also a change going on there that's not really being talked about much at all at the moment. And I'm very fascinated to see where that's going to go, because I mean, for me personally, I'm not making a tentpole movie at the moment. So, the box office receipts, for Spider-Man are great for the producer of Spider-Man, but, for smaller producers, does not necessarily mean that much if you're not getting into those theaters and getting a big chunk of that pie.
Sam, any thoughts?
Just to add to what Melanie said, I think the new media is a very exciting place now for China. So the Youkus and the Tudos, they're basically operating similar to Hulu does here. So people are watching for free, but the revenue is through advertising. But there's also another way that the revenue comes, and that's just through branded content. So brands increasingly in China, similar to here, have started to get involved in creating their own series that they're paying for. So, I mean, when I started working in film and television in China 8 years ago, if you did an independent film in China and you were a Chinese filmmaker, you'd be lucky to have a couple of hundred people see it, because there were no film festivals that played Chinese independent films. You'd have to go to some club and hope that it didn't get shut down, and it was quite dire. But now, if you're a Chinese independent filmmaker, you can work with a huge company like Tudo. They'll fund your film. They'll do ad campaigns. You can take it on tour, and you can be seen by millions of people. And that is something that is very empowering and really exciting, especially as brands are starting to get involved in this.
I should maybe mention it because it's probably not obvious. Like the reality show I did there, it was entirely funded through branded content. Like, it was, the primary sponsor of the show was Pepsi, and they were releasing what's Pepsi Max now in the United States. They were just releasing there, which is basically Diet Pepsi, but it's marketed more towards a male audience. secondary sponsors were Lay's potato chips, MAC Cosmetics, Motorola. They all, subsequently put millions of dollars into it. And I dealt on a daily basis with the CFOs of those companies, not just for Asia, but for, the world. And so that was something I was daily writing content to work in, like the new Motorola Razr phone, the, Pepsi Max, Lay's potato chips, MAC Cosmetics. That it really was a long form commercial, and that really was the model that was working there, because I don't know if everybody realizes this, but in comparison to the United States, networks generally do not pay for TV shows. In China, actually, the TV show normally pays the network for the time. So where here, if NBC buys your show, you're like your life is made. In comparison, you would need to raise millions of dollars to pay NBC to have your show on television. So it's a completely different model, and brand entertainment really is the core part of that. And that's something where China probably preceded America, because it is a reality now in American television. I remember the first reality show, for instance, I worked on season 2 of Big Brother, by season 3 of Big Brother, I directed that, and it was that was the first season that they did text messaging to pay for it, and it was really the kind of a birth area in the early 2000s, late 90s of introducing branded entertainment in America. That's probably something we were a little behind on.
Cliff, I just wanted to ask, have you been involved and seen in contracts any specific issues that are coming up with online platforms such as Youku or Tudo, or is it something that is there as a standard contract about how a certain material can go out there, and how would it play, and what would be the licensing agreements?
Have not yet done a deal with Youku Tudo, but I'm sure it'll come. So.
Okay, I was just curious. I would say let's open it up if we have some questions from the audience to our panelists. Start with you.
I have a question with as far as the censorship. How is that process? Does it cost money to submit your film? I know basically if you write a film in English, it has to be translated in Mandarin. So, which means not, literally changed, phrases that wouldn't make sense. Not everything's going to translate. So you basically have to hire a screenwriter that's going to write it in Mandarin for it to make sense culturally. Also, that's what I heard, and I'm just curious how much that costs, and just the process of getting your film to the censorship board. You have to. I'm assuming there's got to be some kind of fees for that, or if it's bribing your way in, or basically how much that costs, and if there's any protection on your idea. I'm sure that the Writers Guild doesn't really hold up in Beijing.
I'll just take a part of that question from just an independent filmmaking standpoint. I mean, we wanted to take our film to the censors and have it and see what we could do. And there's no yellow pages. There was no way that we, as an individual entity, could actually apply. And then when we were unable to find a Chinese approved partner to apply on behalf, it actually just became just an impossible feat. So in that way, we just had to just go to the online space. But I think these guys might be able to fill in more on the nuts and bolts of when you can actually find that partner who can help that process.
I could only speak in the process of dealing with them. I wasn't the producer, so I don't know what it cost. But I can definitely put you through the process of what it's like meeting with them. I mean, if that's something you want to know. I mean, there's no official handbook, and I would not call it a bureaucratic process. There's nothing you can refer to, and there's no expectation of what they may or may not want. They're issuing. The party issues yearly different sort of agendas or goals that very much work into the censorship. Like, for instance, we were doing China's Next Top Model, essentially, and that very year when we were halfway through the season, the government issued their 7 decrees for the year, and one was the decrease of luxury, and not showing opulence in any way. And we were making a show about opulence, so it was like very difficult. So like there was like a turn on a dime there at that very moment. We had like, you know, had to meet with them the next day and talk about how we were going to make the show about international models, you know, winning cars less luxurious, which obviously didn't occur very well. But I would say that, you know, when you work in America, you're really used to like there's a hierarchy. Like things don't go well, but you know that it's against the regulation. You appeal and you go to the bigger source, and somewhere there's going to be something written on a document that you point to, and you're like, this is the way it's supposed to be. And that just doesn't exist there. I mean, like one censorship board, you're pandering to a group of people, specifically them, and you're taking them out to dinner and you're giving them money and you're making sure that they're provided for in the way they want to be provided for and that they're happy in the way that they want to be happy, and that's what you're dealing with. That's the censorship board from the experience I've had.
As to the process, I haven't, as Sam mentioned, you know, our film didn't go through that process, so I haven't been through that process on a fiction film, but I do, I have witnessed other people going through it, and I do have friends who are part of that process, and I believe for the first step, I believe it's actually free, and the first step is supposedly ridiculously easy in that it's a one-pager. So you give a one-pager synopsis or something to that effect, maybe 1 to 2 pages, and based on that, so it comes in stages basically, your permit, and it's not a one-off thing. It's you get a permit first for the idea, and then to the script, and then the script gets approved, and then you go and you shoot it, and then you have to bring the film back and show them that it's exactly like the script. And their job is to then go through and see where you differed from the script, and if they have a problem with it, you know, then to take it up with you. And so I do know of cases where people have had to get rid of entire scenes in their film, and sometimes even if it is in the script, because circumstances changed. You know, just like what Adam said. So you've had the scene that's going to bridge, you know, 2 scenes together, and all of a sudden you find that you've got to get rid of it, or you've got to come up with something else, you know, to make the story flow, or whatnot. So it's actually not just a one permit. It is in stages, and then after that you also have the permit for finishing the film off and having copies and all of that kind of stuff. So it's actually a slew of permits rather than just one in terms of making it.
Yeah, and because of that, you can have instances where a movie is approved on the story, on the initial idea stage, in the script stage, and then you go off and shoot it, and then at the very end, after you've cut it, they decide that it is completely unacceptable. One of the best examples of that is No Man's Land, which was directed by the director of Crazy Stone in 2009. So he'd just done Crazy Stone, which was a huge hit, and everybody was really keen to see what he was going to do next. And he ended up shooting a movie in Xinjiang province, and then the violence erupted in Xinjiang province. So from his investor's standpoint, it was a very tricky situation because his script had been approved, and based on that approval, the investors had put their money in, and then at the last minute, the whole thing couldn't even be shown. So up to this day, Ning Hao, the director, he's got this movie that is unable to be seen in China, and his investors aren't able to get his money back. So that can happen as well.
On paper, there's protection, but I mean, we're talking about like submitting the script to the government for censorship. There's no way of getting around that, so it's kind of pointless to worry about whether the government's going to steal, you know, our idea. But obviously, you know, in your agreements with your co-production partner or anyone else that you're dealing with, you know, you should definitely try to at least address that in your agreements. So and the court system is developing gradually, you know, in terms of people. I think there's going to be greater reliance, you know, on the court system, you know, as time goes on.
The government are not producers, so it's not them. It'd be more finding your trusted company, you know, finding a partner that you trust. The government's not going to take your idea and then go and make a movie. They're not in that business.
My question actually follows up almost just what Cliff was saying. Can you talk a little bit more about contract disputes, having a co-production partner where they say, yes, you get 30% of the profits and you never see a dime? It happens here in the U.S., but you have at least a court system you can rely on that can help to settle that dispute. So for you, Cliff, just how do you protect against that in the contracts you're working on? And have you seen problems? And for everyone else on the rest of the panel, have you ever had a problem, for example, getting paid what you're contractually obligated, and maybe also issues of bringing any of that money back to America from China, which is sometimes difficult when you're getting into larger amounts?
For me, I haven't, thankfully, I haven't encountered that issue yet. But like I say, just from a general point of view, there is a court system. There's still a question as to how effective it's going to be, but I think things are changing gradually. With regard to the contract, it's the same as really in any other country. You try to spell out as clearly as possible, what each party is supposed to do and what happens, if that doesn't happen. So,
I guess I encountered that for sure. I'd just leave it ambiguous as to who's right or wrong, but I definitely had, on my first job there, a major discrepancy at the end over what I felt I was contractually to be paid and what I was actually paid. And I can say, firsthand, in that instance, I don't regret going to China. I would have traded it. I would have gone for free in retrospect to have that experience. But I was paid differently than what I was agreed to be paid. And you're left in a tough position there because you have to then navigate that through their court system, which is something, especially if you're expected to go back to America. First off, it's going to need to be done in a language that you're not native in. Second of all, it's a world you don't know. And it wasn't possible for me to further pursue. I didn't find that it was going to be beneficial to pursue. So it's something you're going to have to cut your losses on. But yeah, I mean, it's being paid there too is different. It's very much a cash system.
Hello, thank you so much for coming. I'm producing a short film that we're going to shoot in Beijing, the top of next month. And I'm totally dazed and confused as to what's going on. And I'm dealing with an AD in Beijing who actually, she's from Brazil but does speak some Mandarin. It's kind of an interesting situation. And I'm trying to find at least a book or something to tell me how to proceed because my director's coming from America and so is my cinematographer. And I'm being told all kinds of things like you don't need a work permit, a work visa, just come as a tourist. You don't need certain permits. Of course, you're going to pay people in cash. You have to have the red envelopes and all that kind of stuff, trying to figure out who's doing what, because now it's like the casting directors, also your script supervisors, whatever. It's a small budget. But I'm more concerned about legalities. I would hate for my American director and cinematographer to go over there and end up doing something illegal and we can't even get them out of the country because I don't know what's going on. So part of my question is probably to you, Melanie, since you're a producer, is what precautions do you take? And we don't shoot until the middle. They're there for 10 days. Maybe they're about 5 days before they actually start shooting. It's a small shoot. Is it go with the flow kind of situation? And then we're shooting on HD. Can you take out what you're shooting? Should you bring your own, I'm trying to say cards, et cetera, et cetera. What's the deal when you get in versus coming out? What should I really be concerned about?
Yeah, it really depends on what you're, the subject matter, what you're shooting, where you're shooting. So I think, as Adam said, if you want to shoot in Tiananmen Square, you're pretty done.
Well, we want to shoot in Purple Bamboo Park.
Oh, that should be fine. So yeah, it depends on your location, your subject matter, how many people you have, that sort of thing. In terms of permits, the camera's on, but basically, for a short film, I don't think there really is necessarily a visa for short filmmakers to go there, and shoot something. And I've known a lot of short filmmakers who've gone, and there's been no official permits really. You go in, and I would say keep what you bring in to a minimum. So because if you come in as a tourist and you've got this honking red camera.
Oh no, we're not doing that exactly. We're getting equipment there.
You
exactly,
get your stuff
reason,
there
right.
and that kind of stuff. In terms of taking out, that sometimes takes a little bit of creativity depending on what you've got it on. Putting it in different suitcases and stuff like that.
What do you mean different suitcases?
We can talk afterwards.
Okay, all right. It's not a public thing. Okay, but you can take in a hard drive and you can take in whatever, and you can pretty much bring back what you took out, maybe.
Yeah, pretty much. You don't want to be bringing a full suite because when for instance, if you're a real crew going in, like NBC or anybody who's bringing in equipment, that stuff requires permits. That requires stuff at customs. What you bring in, what you take out, does have to be ticked off at the border. Definitely bring lots of have lots of cash handy, cigarettes and just it's always great to have somebody. You really need, your AD is very important, but you also actually need your production manager, your line producer is going to be your best friend. Because that person is going to know the local culture and know where it's safe and when it's safe and know how to talk to people, so that in case you do run into anything, they can come up and just say, oh, it's a student film, and here, have a cigarette. And I'll buy you a
American
drink.
cigarettes,
and
Chinese cigarettes, which one?
have everything on hand.
Okay.
Be prepared. But little things like that in terms of the culture, to have somebody who understands how to get things done there is just going to be your lifeline, for sure.
I just want to add too, because you said you're dealing with the AD, and this may not be an issue because you said she's Brazilian or what?
But she's been living in Beijing for about 2 years. And she does speak
I just want to
Chinese.
mention, because I don't know her experiences or what she's been working in, but the term AD is differently defined there than here. Here, you know what an AD is? It's the person that runs a set, but there it's the assistant of the director, and they consider themselves a creative position.
Right.
So
I can tell that by talking.
So she may not be the best person to logistically be helping you.
Well, what I'm getting from her right now, budgets and things like that seem about right, but I understand what you're saying.
All right. That's, if she's been there 2 years, maybe it's not an issue. I just wanted to mention that because it's something that, I learned firsthand, my first day of shooting there, when the AD wanted to talk about, the color of the wall or something. And I was like, well, why aren't you wrangling the crew? And he wants to quit, because he feels he's not being respected creatively. Right. And I'm like, what's going on here, guy? Yeah, exactly. Well, who does that then? And, it's just, there's a lot of little stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's like, what does this cost? Well, what's your budget? We'll find something.
Right. But the line producer and the UPM is certainly the same there as here. Yeah.
Don't get rid of that person, is what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, just in terms of just a practical level of shooting out on the streets, the less foreigners you can have on set, the better. If you can have a majority ethnically Chinese set, that'll definitely make things easier. In terms of the cigarettes, definitely have someone on your set who really likes smoking, who's local from Beijing. If you're shooting in Beijing, who's happy to go, and if there is any trouble, can go and offer someone, let's say you're shooting in the park and one of the guards, who'll go and have a couple of cigarettes with the guard for an hour and a half. You'd be amazed how helpful that can be.
Wow. So is there anything online? I can't even find anything online, like what the rules are. Or a book or something,
It's again, I think it comes down to what the yeah.
Maybe you can recommend somebody from here. Okay. Thank you.
Last question, if somebody has one. We're all good? Yes?
I was wondering, with the great influx of money that has flowed into the Chinese film industry and the growing box office, do you feel that Chinese cinema is improving in terms of quality of storytelling, in your personal opinion?
I honestly don't think I've seen enough Chinese film to properly comment on that, but I would say there's really cool underground cinema that is popping up as a response to like big budget films. Like I don't know if you guys ever saw like this film Luxury Car, came out about 4 years ago. I mean that's like a great Chinese movie, and obviously it's like something that would never go past the censorship. But you know, I can't comment on like I'm not like a big user of big budget. I'm really curious though to see. I know it's like Hong Kongese, so it's obviously not Chinese, but really curious to see how the Grand Master will do internationally, because I mean Wong Kar-wai is definitely bigger here than he is in mainland China, but Ip Man was like so popular there that you know it's like the same. They just had a series of movies that it's the same story, so I'm curious as whether that'll have an international.
I think there is some improvement. I think I'm hopeful, but I mean partially because also I see a lot of the companies starting to really understand that script is important. I think there has been a shift. It used to be that you know the screenwriter was somebody you shoved in a hole and you know had them pound out pages on the day of, you know, and there was just really very little weight put into that, and I think that is starting to change. You do see, you know, more companies wanting to liaise with foreign scriptwriters, and also really delve into story. You know, sending people over, you know, to here to LA to kind of learn the structure of story, and an international storytelling standard, basically. So it'll take time, though. I think it's such an ingrained thing that comes from years of upbringing and training and whatnot that it's, you know, it takes a while to kind of shift that around. But
Very well. Well, I want to say the 2 words, 谢谢 and 感谢. I appreciate you coming out here. Thank you for Melanie, Adam, Cliff, Sam, and thank you all for attending.